Do you still hold shame within you from your past? Is there certain traumas that still trigger you? Do you hold feelings of unworthiness or inadequacy due to stuff that happened to you when you were a teenager or when you were younger? This is because we have wounds that are deeper than even our core wounds. Buried deep within us that actually dictate a lot of what we do with our lives and a lot of how we live our lives. It is getting to the bottom of these wounds, this shame, this trauma, that will help us to move forward, that will help us to break down the walls around our hearts. My name is Angela Cleary. I'm a feminine empowerment coach and I specialise in healing after narcissistic abuse. So this month, I've uncovered even more core wounds. We have these certain layers of wounding and we heal in layers. But what I've discovered over the last month is that, and I have seen this before, but we have wounds that are even deeper than the deepest wounds we have. So we have wounds that are on the surface, we have wounds that we can see, we have the core wounds that lead to a lot of what we do in our lives. But we have, I think, stuff that's a lot deeper than that. You see, our unconscious mind hides an awful lot from us. It buries an awful lot of our past and an awful lot of what we felt back when we were younger as a way of protection. But fuck this shit, sorry, the unconscious mind is a beautiful and amazing thing, but the trauma that it suppresses from us it's detrimental, I think, really is. Now, I've uncovered a lot of my unworthiness wound. We all have that unworthiness wound. We have that abandonment wound, that rejection wound, that fear of not being good enough. And that's the core. That's the core wound that has led to us experiencing whatever trauma we may have experienced later in life. So our core wound would have been, developed at childhood when we were very young. And it is in uncovering that it will help us to move forward and that will help us to feel worthy again. But there's a wound, well, for me personally, and what I've uncovered over the last month, actually really only discovered it yesterday, but it was triggered from about a month ago, is that there's a wound deeper than that. You know, I've been dealing with my unworthiness, my abandonment issues over the last however many years, since I was 30, so 6 years. And since I've been discovering inner child healing. And this has helped me to break down the walls around my heart. But there's always been something else. You know what I mean? I've dug deep at these core wounds, but yet there was always still something left blocking my heart from opening fully. You know, and I likened it to a trapdoor. My heart is like a trapdoor. You know, 1 minute it's open and then I close it again because it's fear of being hurt, fear of rejection and fear of all that. And I've dealt with those wounds. I'm dealing with those wounds. I think that everything is ongoing. But the wounds I've uncovered over the last month, that were triggered over the last month, they triggered a pain in me that I suffered as a teenager. They triggered pain in me that I suffered in my late 20s. And I didn't understand the depths of this pain until yesterday. Until I started to actually understand it. Like for the last month, I have been in an awful kind of mood. I've been very low. This kind of lack of self-belief was creeping back in. And I kept wondering where it was coming from. Because obviously, you know, when a lot of that unworthiness is to do with our inner child. So anytime we feel that kind of, that lack of being enough, it is always very good to go back to a bit of inner child healing. And I was doing this. But it wasn't the same. There was something different about this unworthiness wound, something deeper. And what I actually discovered was it wasn't just a feeling of not being good enough or unworthy. It was actually a feeling of inadequacy, but inadequacy as a woman, inadequacy in my womanhood, fear of not being good enough to be a woman in a sense. Not feminine enough, being ashamed in a sense of what I was feeling was, it was kind of like self-disgust, self-hatred, self-blame. And to uncover the reasons why yesterday was around my femininity. And I had to dig deep with this. And it really brought an awful lot of emotion up for me. These were wounds that were buried deeper than any wounds that I've ever uncovered before. But literally, it was shame around my femininity. And I believe that we all have this, us women, because we, like, you know, for me personally, I grew up in a masculine household, a toxic masculine household. My mother left when I was a toddler, so I had no female role models. So me transitioning into womanhood, I felt like a failure. I was aspiring, and I didn't understand this obviously at the time, but looking back, I aspired to be a man. I was a tomboy. I you know, my role model was my dad and my brother. And, you know, because as a child, you want to fit in. You want to be accepted. And when your role models are male and you're a girl, how do you feel accepted? You try to be a man. You try to be a boy. You try to be one of them because you don't feel like you fit into their world. So you try to fit into the world. And like I worked a lot of masculine jobs after that. And that's the thing. You don't have to grow up in a masculine household to have experienced this, because we lived in such a patriarchal society. Us women had to suppress our femininity as a way of trying to be equal. And that's the thing, like, you know, we were the lesser sex back in the day. Men treated us like fucking shit. And when we did get into the workplace, we were treated like shit again because we weren't good enough. Oh, this is a man's job, you can't do that. This kind of bullshit. So we had to actually hide parts of our femininity to try and fit into a masculine world. On top of this, there was the slut shaming from other women. So we were shamed for being women by other women. You know, because there was this nitpick and, you know, jealousy shit going on. Now, thankfully, that's changing, and there's a sisterhood and community women are starting to support each other again. But when you think about this, we hold shame from our teenage years anyway, because we think we did stuff wrong, or especially if you grow up with trauma. Like, I grew up with a traumatic childhood. I had abandonment issues and all that, and I've done inner teen healing. So as to overcome that shame of certain things that I did as a teenager. I rebelled, I took drugs, I had sex, this kind of stuff. And I was ashamed of that. But when I look back, I'm kind of like, okay, you were a traumatized child trying to transition into womanhood with no role models. What I did was mild compared to what I could have done because of the trauma that I had experienced. But I'd healed the surface of the shame I felt around then. But now, like over the last month, within the last month, I've had trigger after trigger of the feelings I felt back as a teenager. The feelings I felt 10 years ago when I went through a massive trauma. And the connection was feeling shame and disgust, self-disgust, self-hatred, and feelings of not being good enough to be a woman, feeling that I'd failed as a woman. And that was a bit fucking mind-blowing there, because I am a woman and I'm embracing my femininity. I've lived a very masculine life for most of my life. I grew up in a toxic masculine household. I had mainly male friends. I was always one of the boys. And I had toxic masculine exes, so I took on some of their traits as well. I worked in mainly male environments doing manual work. I did DIY and all that with my dad. He was a carpenter, so I did a lot of work with him as well. I was very one of the boys mentality. I even got angry. I even had inner misogyny. I had a misogyny against myself. I was sexist towards myself. And I was sexist towards other women as well, because of my toxic masculine traits that I had embodied. And I remember being in work, and I work in a man's role. I did a fucking great job, by the way. But I one of the guys, one of the men in there, he compared me to one of the women. And I was like, don't you dare call me a woman. And I really got angry. And this is the thing with us women trying to fit into this world of sexism and toxic masculinity and patriarchy. We have had to suppress our femininity for a long time. But because of suppression, like when we hide parts of ourselves, this gets buried in our shadow. And it comes out in ugly ways, you know, and until we actually face it and uncover it, we're actually still going to be, it's going to be toxic. Like, you know, if you hide parts of yourself, it's like hiding, it is going to bubble in toxicity in certain ways. So like, we have to actually ask ourselves, like, where is the shame coming from? Do we feel parts of ourselves that we're still hiding? Are we still afraid to be the feminine women that we are? Do you know, are we suppressing certain parts of our femininity to try and be accepted by this masculine world? Are we like? And that's what broke my heart yesterday. Now, I got very emotional yesterday because I've been going through this shit for the last month, you know, and all the pain from my teens and from 10 years ago kept coming back in. And I knew that's fine, you know, when we're triggered, triggers are brilliant, triggers are our guides. You know, and to have this external trigger was really beneficial for me because I'd been avoiding refacing this wound. And I didn't even know the connection to the wound and my teenage years and 10 years ago and this month. I didn't even see the connection until yesterday. And the connection was my femininity, my womanhood, my feeling good enough to be a woman, my feeling like I failed or that I was inadequate as a woman. And like, you know, I've had unworthiness wounds, which is stemmed from my inner child. And I was so different this month. This month, I was going downhill. I was feeling so, I lacked self-belief. And I was wondering, because I knew it wasn't my inner child, because it was a different kind of unworthiness. And I was trying to figure it out. And then I joined all the dots yesterday from my teenage years, from 10 years ago and from this month. And I'm like, whoa, it's my shame and my self-disgust. It is. Like, I felt as I became a woman as a teenager that I failed because I didn't have the proper role models. And, you know, and it's hard for us women, especially in Ireland. When we leave primary school, I was 12. I went into secondary school when I was 12. I left primary school as a child. I had to go into secondary school as a woman. We had to shave our legs, fucking all this kind of bullshit to try and fit into this fucking adult world. And like, it's scary. And it's scary especially when you do not have a female role model. I didn't have a mother to help me into womanhood. 2 fucking men, you know, a teenage boy and an alcoholic father. How the fuck was I supposed to do it? And like, you know, I was trying to unconsciously aspire to be a man. So I didn't know what way I was. Do you get me? I was like, how am I transitioning into womanhood when I'm aspiring to be a man? Like, do you know that kind of, I don't know. It's very confusing. But what I'm trying to say is, like, all of it stems back to, and the shit that I went through, the trauma I went through 10 years ago was connected. It's all connected to my sacral chakra, and it's all connected to my femininity. And the triggers over the last month have brought up all of this, but I only connected the dots yesterday. You know, we have this, I believe it's not just me. I think that we're, like, you know, us women had it fucking hard, and we may still do. It depends on the roles we play or the jobs we do or the people that we surround ourselves with. You know, I no longer surround myself with toxic masculine people, and I've balanced my masculine and feminine energy, but understanding the triggers I had over the last month made me realize, hold on now, I haven't fully embraced my femininity because I've been holding this deep, deep shame, this deep disgust that I haven't been good enough to be a woman. And I know that sounds weird, but I believe some of you other women will understand me when it comes to that. When we go through certain aspects of life or certain health issues or certain things, we can feel inadequate as women sometimes. We can feel that we failed as women, you know, and in certain ways. And that is very tough. Like, and we don't know this consciously. As I said, we suppress this kind of emotion. We suppress this stuff below any of the other wounds. And like literally I was digging. For the last month I've been trying to figure this out. And it only came to me yesterday, and it was just like, I feel different over the last 2 days. I've been feeling very detached for the last month. Very emotional for the last month. Very fearful for the last month. And I love my triggers are good because they help me face what is inside me, but because I didn't recognize it. Because like it was a wound that I'd never uncovered before. A wound that I didn't even know was there. And that was scary. It was scary how deep that wound was. And how raw and real and big that wound was. And how much it actually dictated my whole life. And it was only because of the triggers of the last month that I even realised that it was there. That's the scary part. I know I was avoiding the trauma from 10 years ago, and it's only because it was the 10-year anniversary that I actually just said, look, it's time now, I have to face it. But when I did face it, I didn't connect it to my past, as in my teenage years, and I didn't connect it to my femininity until I had the triggers over the last month. And I've never felt the kind of detachment that I felt over the last month. And I knew it was dictating how I felt about my career. It was dictating how I felt about myself as a woman. And I didn't know this till yesterday. It was to do with the woman side. But it was dictating how I was feeling about myself and my adequacy. But I didn't understand where that feeling of inadequacy came from until I figured out that it was to do with my femininity and my womanhood. So this is why it's so beneficial to ask yourself, are you still holding that kind of shame from your teenage years, from your past? Did you have to suppress parts of your femininity to try and fit into this world? Were you slut-shamed by other women? Because all of this can lead us to suppress our femininity. Health issues as a woman can also do that. Transitioning into womanhood as a teenager can do that. It can make us feel these feelings around womanhood, because it is a big thing, and to actually try and fit into a masculine world, then we're suppressing these parts of ourselves. And we need to empower our femininity. We need to bring that back to the surface. We need to be who we truly are. We are all worthy, and we are all women. We're fucking allowed to be women. You know what I mean? We don't have to be living in this masculine role any longer. We get to embrace our soft side. And this is men and women. This is for men as well. We all have a balance of masculine and feminine energy. We need to balance it, because having too much masculine energy makes us fucking toxic, makes us angry, makes us aggressive. We need to have that soft side. We need to have a good balance. Yes, we want a fucking man, but we also want a man who has emotions as well. But as a woman, we want to have a balance of both sides, because if we're too fucking emotional as well, that's not good. That's unhealthy. We need the balance of both. So, as we're trying to fit into this masculine world, we have to still embrace who we are as women and own our womanhood. That's the part that's what scared me, really, is that I actually felt such disgust internally for myself. That's what I felt. And it was proper self-disgust. And I didn't even know this. It wasn't on the surface. It was all unconscious. But I actually had a deep disgust for myself due to stuff that I had gone through as a teenager and 10 years ago. And the triggers that I had last month. I was starting to, those feelings of disgust were coming up again. And I'm like, why? I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything to be ashamed of. I'm not less of a woman because I had toxic masculine traits, or because I went through a trauma 10 years ago that made me question, or made me feel like a failure in a sense. Do you know what I mean? There's the self-blame, the self-disgust, the feeling of inadequacy, feeling that I wasn't living up, the feeling that I was a failure as a woman. All this kind of stuff was resurfacing, and that's what was leading me to my lack of self-belief and my detachment over the last month. So It was deep. It was so deep. It was lower than my core wounds. It was the deepest wound I've ever had. And I've been constantly digging all these wounds, even the ones I've buried. I'll resurface them, all of them. But this one was deep, and it was dark. It was dark. And like, I feel such a breath of fresh air the last couple of days because I'm actually after understanding it. And it's like such a release, such a relief. So this is why it's so important to be aware of how you are feeling. Be aware of why you are feeling stuff. Be aware of your triggers. Ask yourself, what wound is resurfacing with this trigger? What pain has your unconscious mind buried deep within you? Because this is what dictates our lives. These buried wounds, these buried traumas are what dictate our lives. And unless we uncover them, we're going to live in this detachment. We're going to live in this self-hate, this self-blame, unconscious self-hate and self-blame continuously until we uncover it. I was avoiding refacing my trauma of 10 years ago for 10 fucking years. And that actually was connected to traumas from 15 to 20 years ago. This is how long this wound has been buried. I've been digging deep at my childhood wound, but these are the wounds that have been buried dark and deep within me for nearly 20 years. And that's fucking scary. And I didn't even know I felt these things till yesterday. You get me? So this is the kind of core wounds, that these deep, dark wounds that we have, that we do need to resurface, that we do need to bring out so that we can release them once and for all, and that they will no longer control our lives. We have to embrace our femininity. We are powerful women. We are divine feminines, and we should be proud of that, and we should not suppress it, and we should not be ashamed of it anymore. We are who we are, and we deserve to own all of that. We should not feel shame, we should not feel disgust, or we should not feel inadequacy or failure around our femininity due to the world that we grew up in. Embrace yourself, empower yourself, and heal those wounds so that you can be the full embodiment of the feminine that you are. So thank you so much for listening today, and I really hope this resonates. If it does, please like and share, and please subscribe to my channel so I can reach as many people as possible. And if you would like help on your journey, please book me for a discovery call today, and I would love nothing more than to help you on your path.